There are three things with the demo of the useOptimistic hook in the React documentation that I think could be better. Now, the example is quite simplistic, so it's difficult to be too hard on it, but you can see pretty clearly there are some real issues with the way it's implemented in the documentation that if you wanted to take it into production, you'd need to do a little extra work. And that's what I'm going to show in this video. The useOptimistic hook allows you to present actions that are still taking place in the browser while they're happening asynchronously behind the scenes, without the delay of waiting for that asynchronous action to finish. And it's demonstrated here with a demo at the bottom of the page, where if we enter in a message here, we'll see it's sending, and then once that resolves, it shows, which is great. However, these three issues are, number one, if I send a message and then type another one, you'll see that the input was cleared when the form re-rendered. Let's have a look again. We saw the number 4 was removed because the form re-rendered after the optimistic message had been sent. Another issue with this implementation is that if I enter many messages quickly, we'll see duplicates appear in the list. And it's not really a great experience. And my final issue is that if I press reset, I lose all of my state, I lose all of my messages, and that's not how your app is going to work. And that's simply because in this demo, we're only storing these messages in a use state hook. So how do we fix these three issues of not clearing the form when it's been typed into, not showing duplicates when they're entered quickly, and not losing that state once you refresh the page, and instead storing that somewhere in the cloud? Well, I'm going to fix all those things by taking this demo exactly as it is, moving into a Next.js 15 application, and then storing those messages into the Sanity Content Lake. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new Next.js application by running npx create next app at latest, and I'll just call this one Next.js. I'm going to select all of the defaults here. So I'm going to get Tailwind CSS. I'm going to get TypeScript as well, which is going to be the first part of converting that demo from the React docs into Next.js, is actually moving it all to TypeScript. Now I can go into the Next.js directory, run npm run dev, and here we can see the default Next.js landing page. I can open up the file browser here and open up this home page. I'm going to wipe all of this here for now and just say that's going to be home. I can get rid of some of these CSS styles as well. Just reset that all back to the basics. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new components directory and call this first one chat, which is what the root app is currently called in the React docs here. So this won't be the default function. We're just going to call this one chat. I will need to grab those imports. And we've got TypeScript errors all over the place, but we can fix those in a moment. I'm going to grab this thread component and put that in its own file. Again, I'll need those same imports. And we also need our action, which is this deliver message action. Let's create a new folder for those. And we'll call this one deliver message.ts and save that one as well. We'll save this one as well. And so now we need to fix all of our TypeScript errors. So let's get rid of that import for now and fix up that deliver message. We can see we've got a path alias in Next.js for that local directory. We don't need our ref or our useOptimistic imports in this one. Our send message form data, that's going to have the type form data. Our thread currently needs some types for those props as well. We will need a type for this message object that we're using in multiple locations. So in my source directory here, I'm also going to create a types.ts file. And let's just export a type called message. And so text is going to be a string. Sending is only going to be used in the optimistic states. So that's going to be a Boolean. The key, I actually want to make a string instead of the demo here for a few reasons, but I'll get to those in a moment. And key isn't currently set in the demo either. These two are not required types, but the text type definitely is. So now we can type these by saying that this is going to be a message type. Well, it's going to be an array of messages. Let's make that into a string. Number 1 is definitely a string. Actually, I have an issue here. That's not the constant string. I actually want a string type. That's what I want. So that has now fixed this key here. That's been fixed. We still have type issues in our thread component though. So let's go over to thread. This needs some props. So I can get rid of this use state here. Let's create a type thread props. That's going to have messages, which is going to be that message type that we just created. This send message function is the one that we're passing down from the chat component, and that's going to be a form data prop there. That is that form data and returns void. And so this is the props type for our thread here. Let's go back and make sure that fixed the chat. Did that fix chat? Cannot find the name thread. Oh, we need to actually import that. And we didn't use the path alias. We really should. So chat is now fixed. Let's go back over to the thread component. We need to fix our types here. So this is actually going to be a HTML form element or null. And we'll start it off as null. Our form data needs some types here. So form data in this. The current form ref might not exist, so we can add optional chaining to fix that. And now our new message needs some state as well. That's actually going to be a string at this point. Getting the message value from the form data isn't guaranteed, so let's actually extract this into its own constant. So a constant of message is going to be this, and if it's found, return that to a string. And we can also return here, so if there is no message, let's add some sort of error handling here. Just don't do this otherwise. So now we've guaranteed that it is a string. We'll add that optimistic message. So that's it. We've fixed all of our TypeScript errors. Let's go back to our application now. And if we refresh the page, we still don't see anything because we actually need to import these. So here in our home page, let's import that chat component. And we failed to compile. What's our problem here? We haven't made it a client component. There we go. Now, this is the moment of truth. Does our demo work? If I press 1, hit send, sending. This is the exact same behavior as before. Perfect. We've got duplicates. And if I type 1 and then send another, there we go. It wiped the form for me as well. So we have the demo set up and we have the exact same problems as the demo in the React.js documentation, but all in TypeScript, all in Next.js. Let's go about fixing these. But first, let's add a little bit of styling because at the moment it doesn't look really great and we'd like to recreate that nice experience that we had before. So here back in the home page, let's go and wrap this chat in some divs and give them some classes. So let's go, it's gray 50 and let's give some padding. And then there's sort of like a card look to it. So let's say BG white, and that can have some padding as well and make that one rounded and give it a shadow. That looks nice. Let's give this a min height screen too, so we get gray all over. That's much better. Back over in our thread, that form needs some styling too. So here with the input, let's say that this one has a border gray 500. Let's give it some padding. Nicer. Let's make it rounded. I reckon we could go 300 actually, but softer. 400, better. Let's give the button the same classes first, but also BG blue 500. And make the border BG blue 500 as well, so they're the same height. Perfect. Let's give it text white, font semi-bold. Strengthen it up a bit, that's nice. The form itself could do with some styles too, so let's say it's flex, give it a gap. Perfect. And even our messages here really could do some styling. So let's wrap this whole thing in a section. Let's give this a flex col, give it a gap of 2 as well, so our messages get that. And lastly, let's give each individual message a little bit of style too. So give it some padding, give it a nice blue background, make it rounded. There we go. So let's rerun the same demo again. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. And if I type that, yes, I'm still getting the same error. So recreated the whole demo in Next.js. Looks much nicer thanks to Tailwind. Now let's fix the dang thing. The easiest thing to fix is the way that that input field is being wiped just because it's being re-rendered. If we set this to a controlled input instead of uncontrolled as it currently is, then we can save the current state and the current value of that field input. So let's add some state to our thread component here. And I've got a shortcut to create some state. So this will be input value, and we'll start it off as a string. We will need to import use state. And then down in our input here, we can change this to a controlled component by saying it's the value of this field is input value. And so then on change, we're going to need a function here which takes the event. And we'll set the input value to the event target value. If we reload the page here, 1, 2, wow. Now it worked a little worse than it did before. We haven't lost the value in there, but we haven't reset it either. So the way that field was being reset currently is in the action that's passed to the form, we have this form ref current reset, which is going to attempt to reset the entire form. But now we're saving that state into the input value instead. So you might think that what we should do is set input value back to nothing here. So let's save that and try again. 1, 2, I haven't cleared the value again. There's something around the way that React 19 runs this form action, and if we have a look at the form itself, here is the action. It's not actually resetting that in time. So what we can add is another event handler to the form. So on submit, we can run a function here which is going to set the input value back to that empty string and remove that from our form action. Now we should get the behavior that we want. Type 1, enter, type 2, hasn't reset the form. So now I can type these, enter these, and I haven't lost the form value. Perfect. That's one issue fixed. The next one, duplicates. If I enter these really, really quickly, I'm still going to get that same problem. Let's try this again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's too many duplicates and then they all go away. So the optimistic state's actually worse in this current state. What we need to do is track the key of every one of these array items. We saw in our types here that we set a key value on the type. And in the initial messages here, we do have a key, but these other messages that come in, the optimistic function that runs doesn't actually add a key. It just adds this new array item and throws an item on the end of the current state to say, here's the text of the new one, and the sending value is true, but what its key is, and does that message already exist in this array, that isn't currently checked in this demo. So what we now need to do is change the way that these functions run to always have a key and make sure that key is consistent so that we can always remove those so that there's never any duplicate keys being rendered on the page. And fortunately, because we converted all of this to TypeScript, we can make TypeScript do the heavy lifting for us. So if we make key required, that's going to immediately throw errors. I'm going to just move this file over. So now this is a problem because our set messages function is just trying to take in this string and our optimistic message is just trying to take in this string and we no longer have a key value. So we need to update all these functions to make sure that they have keys. First of all, in the form action, there's the action that runs when the form is submitted. Let's create a consistent key. And we can use the current date when this was submitted and get the time and convert it to a string. And so this shouldn't be easily duplicated. We can take this key and our add optimistic message, we're going to convert this now. So the text will be message. The key value will be that key that we've just created. This text message thing is a little bit complicated. So let's change that to text actually. So add optimistic message, we're now passing in this object with text and a key, which means we need to change this here to say that this is actually going to be a type of a message. We're passing a message type object into this function now. We're not just passing a string. So what we could do instead of this is say, actually, our new message, it's not just the text anymore. We could spread that in, but we're still going to get that same issue. We're going to be spreading in items that might already exist. Instead, the logic of this needs to change to a function to check first, does the message exists in state? So let's have a look through the state first and find, for every message in the current state, does the message key value equal the key value of the new message? If so, then just return the state as it is. Don't add a new item if that new key is already actually in the state. Otherwise, then we can return a new item with that new key with sending set to true. Now, if I hit save, I'm not sure if that's actually going to fix it all yet because we haven't changed anything in the chat. Yes, we've got an issue here. Message is not defined. So we have an error here. Yes, I didn't fix this. If there's no text, we should return. We could probably move that up because we're checking this first. Let's do that right. Okay, perfect. Let's fix TypeScript errors before we go any further and try that again. Our send message function is still taking in form data, and it is passing form data along to this deliver message action, which is kind of neat in that it's always taking the source. Actually, that currently needs to be form data. Perfect, thank you. That's great that that's also taking the source, but if we're generating the message once optimistically inside of this thread component, then we might as well just keep passing around that message. So what I'm going to change this to is I'm going to send along the message, which is just our text and key. So let's go back to our send message function. So this is actually going to be a message. And so this also, let's deliver the message. And we can add in our new message. And our action will need to be updated as well because this is no longer form data. This is message, the type that we just created. Oh, the sent message is actually what we should be returning in there. And has that updated? There's one more type issue that we have here. Yeah, this is still checking for form data, so that should be a message of that same type. We've cleared all our TypeScript errors. Let's review everything so far. Our form action runs when the form is submitted. We're getting the text from that message field. We're creating a key. We're adding that optimistic message. This add optimistic message function here is going to check, does this new message already exist in the current state of things by its key? If so, just leave state as it is. If not, then add that new item upon the end. And then while that is happening, also send message, which is that server-side response. And that send message is taking that same message, doing the deliver message, which is that server action. And then that's going to set our client state to the finalized versions. This is where everything's finished. The optimistic, awaited, asynchronous network side has all finished. Let's check our demo now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. No more duplicated keys, and we can submit these as fast as we like. Let's try it one more time just to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Excellent. That's 2 issues down. 1 more to go. At the moment, I still have this issue. If I press refresh, I lose all my work. Not fun, especially for a text chat. So we need to store all of this content somewhere. And if you know me, you know I'm going to say, let's put it into Sanity. It's what I know, it's what I like to use, and we can store anything in Sanity's Content Lake. And so we're going to need to set up a Sanity Studio, a free Sanity project, and we'll eventually get rid of this use state here for these messages because that's not where they'll be stored. They'll be stored in the Content Lake, and we'll query them into our Next.js application. So let's close all these files for now. I'm just going to hide this folder too, and bring back my terminal. Let's open up a new terminal process. And from here, I'm going to run npm create sanity at latest. I'll create a new project. Let's call this one Optimistic. And again, just select all of the defaults, including a clean studio project, because I want to create my own schema types for this one. It's a default public data set. That's fine. Let's put this in a directory called Studio, a clean project, yes, TypeScript, yes, npm, sure, let's roll. All right, let's go into the Studio directory, run npm run dev. All right, our Sanity Studio currently has no schema types. Let's fix that. The content lake is schemaless, so we could just start writing any shape of content that we like, really. But if we want TypeScript support and we want authors to be able to view this content within the Studio context, we need to register these schema types to the Studio config. So let's create a new one called chat type. So I'm going to export a constant called chat type. And I can use these define type helpers in the Studio configuration where TypeScript will help guide us if I happen to make any mistakes while I'm creating this schema type. So it's going to be a name of chat with a type of document. I think we need to also have a title for document types. It's going to have fields. Of course, every schema type needs fields, which is going to be an array. And we can define a field. So first of all, we're just going to have one field type in this. It's going to be an array of messages. So a type of array, and messages is going to be an array of define field message type objects. So every item inside of the messages array will be a type of object, and it will only have one field, and that is the type of text. Actually, the name text, the type is string. Let's save that there. And we don't see that immediately in Studio because we need to register it here in the schema types. So it's a chat type there, hit save. Now we see this type in the Studio. And I could go and create this document here. One more thing I'd like to change here before we go any further is actually put this in live edit mode. We're not going to really have drafts and published versions of these. They are going to have live edits made directly to them. So let's set that to true. And one more change I'd like to make here is that when we create new documents, I just want the preview representation of them to be the UUID of that document. So here I could create a new message item here, and I can add this item, and I can say, hello from Sanity Content Lake. There's our first message. This document is represented by its UUID, and that's what we're going to use for the routing in the Next.js application as well. We have one message. We don't need to publish that because it's live edited directly to the document. So there, we have our schema for messages in the Sanity Studio. One thing I want to do before we go any further, though, is create types for this schema. So back in the terminal, let's just open up another window here. Inside of the studio directory, first of all, I'm going to run npx sanity at latest schema extract. That's going to make a static representation of the studio schema, which our queries are going to use in the Next.js application to create all of our types, not only for this messages type, but also the response of any GROQ queries that we write to fetch this content. I know I've glossed over a lot of concepts very quickly there, but hold on and we will get through it. Back in the Next.js directory, I'm also going to create a file called sanity TypeGen.json and paste in this that I already had prepared earlier. What this is going to do is look back up one directory for the studio's schema that we just created. It's also going to look through our sanity directory, which we haven't created yet, for any GROQ queries. And it's also going to create this types file for our sanity schema and our GROQ queries, which we need to write now. So here in our source directory, let's go and create a new folder called sanity. And within this, we can store our queries and our client configuration. Before we go any further, we will need to install one more package. So back in our Next.js directory, let's npm install next-sanity. It's this all-in-one toolkit to grab everything that you need to work with Sanity and put it into a Next.js application. Really smart. We're not going to touch on the majority of the features. We just want Sanity client and we just want GROQ queries for now. That's done. So now in our Sanity directory, let's create one file here for our queries. And I'm going to first of all write a query for the chat IDs query. So go and find every document in the content lake where the type is chat and just grab its ID, which is this element over here. If we wrap this in a define query helper function from next-sanity, we'll get those types generated for us. This is what GROQ looks like. The asterisk is get everything. Inside of these square brackets, filter what we get from that. If type equals chat, return that. And from that array of items, let's get just the ID attribute off of that. So this will return an array of strings. We're also going to need another GROQ query when we navigate to a chat page to return just the messages from that document for that chat. So let's call this one chat messages by ID query. So in this query, again, we're going to say in the entire data set, filter it down to just where the ID equals a chat ID variable that we pass in, grab just the first one of those results that comes back, and inside of that document that gets found, loop over the messages array, which we've just created over there, and from that messages array, open a projection, take the underscore key value, but reshape it to an attribute called key, and also return the text of that message. And then for that one document that has been found, just return the messages array. So you can see with GROQ that we have incredible power to reshape the data that's returned and get very specific about just the content that we want. I'm also going to create another file here in the Sanity directory here for the Sanity client. And in this one, I'm going to export a const called client. Let's create client, bring that in from next-sanity. Now our project ID and dataset name, we can go and get that from the Sanity config file. So this is what was just created for us when we created a new Sanity project. We also need to add two more settings, the API version, which we can just set to today's date or something close to it, and use CDN. You would often set use CDN true in a lot of occasions, particularly if you're using Sanity and Next.js to build websites. But in this instance, I'm going to set it to false because I'm building an app and I just want to hit our API directly to be able to get fresh content all the time. I don't want caching on a live application like this. And there are many more strategies you could take to do that. So now we have Sanity client to be able to fetch content. We've got our GROQ queries to be able to fetch content. We've got TypeGen to be able to create types. Let's do that before we go any further. So inside of our Next.js directory, npx sanity at latest TypeGen generate. And all things going well, we should see some types created for us in our Sanity folder. There we go. 12 schema types and 2 GROQ queries. Those were the queries that we wrote. Here's our types. Let's scroll through these very quickly. A lot of these are built-in default types from the studio, but right down the bottom, we should see there's our queries. So that's our query, and this is the result that we're going to get. So we've got types for our query results already, which is excellent. Let's close all of these things, bring up our file browser again, collapse everything. What we need to do now is list all of the existing chats from Sanity on the homepage and then create a dynamic route to be able to navigate to that individual chat as well. So let's bring the Next.js homepage back up and let's open up our homepage once again. Instead of showing the chat here, what we need to do is fetch our content. So let's say this is going to be called chats. Let's bring our client, run a fetch, and we're going to have that chat IDs query. We need to await that, which means we need to turn this into an async function. And let's just do some debugging first of all. Make sure we get what we wanted. There we go. That's our ID, just like we want. So now instead of debugging, let's actually just render this onto the page. Chats.map, chat. Let's create a link using next, href. Let's set the URL to chats and then the chat. Actually, let's call this chat ID because it's more clear what that is. And we can just render that chat ID as well. This really needs a class name to say underline to make it look like a link. What's our problem at the moment? Missing a key prop, of course. Perfect. If we click on this, we'll get a 404. So we need to create a dynamic route. So this will be in the chats folder. We'll also need a dynamic route. So let's call this one chat ID. And then inside of that, our page.tsx to publish the route. Now our 404 has changed to an error, which is actually really good. We can copy all of this and paste this in here because we're going to reuse a lot of the same things. So this is going to be our chat page. Instead of the chat IDs query, we need the chat messages by ID query. And we can remove all of this. And once again, just turn it to debugging, stringify. This should be a chat singular. Now, at the moment, we'll get another error because we passed a variable into that GROQ query and we haven't actually rendered it. So if I refresh this here, yes, there's some issues here. That might not be the issue that I thought it was going to be, but I do know that there's a problem. We need to pull the params from our dynamic route. So that's going to be from that params object, which in Next.js is going to be the chat ID. It's going to be a string. Oh. And now in Next.js 15, the params are awaited. So let's change this to query params and await the params. And we can pass that into Sanity client. So now we have a better error, but null suggests that we haven't actually found anything. And I know my query params are correct. Let's have a look at that. So chat ID, yes, that's the variable that gets passed in. Let's go and have a look at the query. Chat ID, that's what gets passed in. We're looking for messages. Let's have a look at the chat type. Oh, there's my error. I said that was a single message. That should be messages. Great. So now if we go back here, we're actually going to have an issue where it's going to say, hey, there's this message field here, but this is called messages now. I'm just going to remove that, create a new one, say hello from Sanity, and publish that one, which is great. So it's now set to live. So now when I go back to my app, I can click on this chat and load this up here. The chat ID is correct. We don't need to debug this anymore. And I can go back and show our chat messages response. Perfect. So that's our messages array with our key and our text, just like we wanted before. So let's actually call this messages, not chat. Perfect. And now we can import that chat component and we can say that the initial messages are now the messages that we got from Sanity, which is a problem at the moment because our chat component doesn't actually accept any props. So let's add this messages, and we're going to need some chat props, where messages is going to be an array of the message type. Let's destructure that off messages, and we can now just wipe out this set state. And we can get rid of this set messages. We can get rid of this send message for now as well. We have a TypeScript error here where messages thinks it's going to be null. Oh, I know what's happened here. Because I changed my schema, I need to go back and into my studio, npx sanity at latest schema extract, because we changed the schema, so we need to refresh the extraction. And now back in our Next.js application, run our TypeGen generate once again as well. Now our type is fixed. Yes, we've got the proper response here, and we've still got an issue here because messages could be null. What we can do here is throw a 404. So if there's no messages, then not found is a function from next navigation. So essentially throwing a 404, which says, if we couldn't find messages based on this current ID, then that chat mustn't exist, which means it's not null, which means we can render this chat. So that's great. We're able to store all of our messages in the content lake, but we're not able yet to write those messages to the content lake using our Next.js application. Let's fix this next. So now let's close all these files once again. And what we can do is open up our terminal. And let's just clear that for now as well. Inside of the studio directory, if we run npx sanity manage, it opens up the management interface for our project where we can create tokens. Go down to the tokens here. We will need a token with write access. So it's going to be an editor. And you can copy this token if you like, but I've already deleted this project by the time you're watching this video. Back in our Next.js directory, let's touch a file called .env.local. And if we bring this up, we can call this one the Sanity write token. And we're storing this as an environment variable because it is a protected secret. This token will be used to authenticate the Sanity client in our server action. So we can close a studio folder here. Let's bring up our server action where we're going to deliver the message. At the moment, this function is still as it was in the demo, in that it just simply waits for a second and then returns the message. What we need to update this to do is use an authenticated Sanity client to take the current message and send it to the content lake. So let's remove all of this here, first of all, and get the token, which we called Sanity write token. And because we're putting protected secrets in this now, let's throw use server at the top. And now we can await our Sanity client, which is going to have some different config where it's going to use that token. It is going to patch. We need the document ID. So we will need to pass this into the function as well. Chat ID is going to be a string. We can patch that document. First, we will need to set the value of that messages array, just in case it's not. If the document is currently empty, we'll need an empty array to start with. Then we can append on the messages field the message that we're passing in. And we can commit that. And then finally, return the message just like we did before. And so now that our deliver message function needs this chat ID string, we're going to need to pass that down from our dynamic route. So here, from where we display the chat, let's also add this chat ID as a prop. We can pass that straight from the query params, which means our chat component needs to be ready to receive this chat ID as a string. And we can grab that from the props. And we won't pass it into the send message thing here, but we can just pass it straight from props. Sent message isn't required anymore either because we're not actually using that to update state, and we won't need this useState import again either. So let's take a look at everything now. In our thread component here, we still have that optimistic state, which is going to add optimistic message on the client side here, but it's also going to run this send message function, which was passed down from the chat component. This send message function is going to run this deliver message function here, which is a server action, which is going to use our authenticated Sanity client and try and patch this document ID with an empty array if it's not already set, and append our new message as it's being sent along. Let's try that on for size. Something happened. Let's go back to our Sanity Studio. You can see that the document was updated, but it wasn't sent along in a way that Sanity Studio expects. Let's inspect the document here. There's our new message, so it has the text with the number 1, but that key value has been stored as just key instead of underscore key, which is what Sanity Studio expects. So let's update this instead. So instead of just appending the message, let's say that the text is going to be the message.text. The underscore key value is going to be the message.key. And actually, we saw in this as well the type of message, which is sort of just an important bit of bookkeeping here. So for cleanliness, we'll also add that type message. So we can see here there is a slight difference between the message that we're passing along in our application and the message being written to our Sanity Studio. But because we're reshaping this data when we are querying it back into the application, it's okay to send it up as an underscore key and retrieve it as a word key normally written. So let's try this again. I'm going to just add that missing key. I'm going to remove that item again. I don't need to press publish because it's a live edited document. Let's try one more time. One sending, it's disappeared again. Let's go back to the Sanity Studio and find out what happened. So our message wrote into Sanity, but it wasn't actually rendered in the Next.js application. We're getting very close now. This is because it didn't know to re-render those results and refetch those results. What we can do is revalidate the path with Next.js to make that page update once this action happens. So thankfully, we have this revalidate path function from Next.js, and we know the path is chats and then the chat ID. So thankfully, we've already got all the parameters that we need to make this happen. Let's go back and try one more time. 1. Actually, let's write something else. 2. Perfect. It revalidated the path. So we had that stale data before it was sent, but now that it has been resent, it refreshed the data behind the scenes. If I type 3, perfect. I think this is really working now. To get the full effect and see what's actually happening, we'll want to see the Sanity Studio and our application side by side, because the Sanity Studio is always real-time, where we are recreating a real-time-ish feeling experience on our front end with those Optimistic UI updates. So if we update another item here and add another message to the chat for, so it's optimistically sending on the right-hand side, we see it was already actually sent. On the left-hand side, it's written to the studio, and this is how fast it's happening. And we should no longer have any issues with duplicates either, even though this is all happening with server-side content. Let's do some quick edits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we can see they're coming into the content lake on the left-hand side. They're updating on the Next.js app on the right-hand side. And best of all, this is the final test, the final bug we're getting rid of. If I hit the refresh button, all my chats are still there. I haven't lost it in client state. So that's taking the React docs example of useOptimistic and pulling it all the way into production. This thing is now ready to go. There is one small thing I would like to add, and that's error handling, just in case that mutation didn't work, which is always a possibility with a network request like this. But that might be good food for another video. Let me know, is there anything I missed? Is there anything more you'd like to know about optimistic updates and storing them on the server? You could store them anywhere, you could store them anywhere you like, but I like putting them in the content lake. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks.